This is the first of a live just on me and the Golden Globe race. As you know, we're a small team and it's all pretty basic, but as we move further along into the future and when we get back to Les Sables-d'Olonne where the race office is, we will actually have regular studio updates. It'll be 3 cameras, there'll be 2 or 3 people here, and we'll talk about the events as they're happening and look at it in review, you know, in the past, and talk about the weather and talk about issues that entrants are having. Right at the moment, we're still in Marina Rubicon in the Canary Islands, and as you all know, there's lots going on. We fly out of here in a day or 2 back to France, and then we'll be in the studio and so on. So at the moment, Jane's there with the camera propped up on the seat. I'm at the lounge. I've got my computer here, and if I get it coming up live later on, if you've got any questions, I might be able to answer those questions. But briefly, we'll just go over the past 2 weeks, and then I'll just go through one at a time and give you my personal opinion on the observations of each of the entrants when they sailed through here, because it's very interesting, especially when you put it in the context of their boats and who's in the racing group versus who's in the adventure group and so on. There's little things that you may not have picked up on, and as I say, it'll be just my personal opinions. And then we'll talk specifically about the issue of wind vanes and also you know, Hanks versus Furling gear, because they're 2 of the things that are going to be very prominent, especially as the fleet moves down through the Atlantic. So it was a fantastic start in Les Sables-d'Olonne. You know, the French people, brilliant, 35,000 people on the wall. You know, the race village, the whole atmosphere on the marina was just off the planet. You know, it's the only way to describe it. They head off as a fleet, and it was very interesting watching the tracker, and all of a sudden, halfway, nearly towards the end of the Bay of Biscay, the headwinds, and then we had that mass spaghetti, all boats going all over the place and not really any coordination. Everyone was just trying to make the most of virtually no wind. Eventually the wind fills in. Prior to that, a couple of the entrants actually motored. Mark Slats motored for a few hours. I think he had 3 or 4 sessions, a few hours at a time, to put himself strategically into a good position. Entrants can motor. They've all only got 160 litres of fuel, so you can't motor all the way around the world. He actually rode also for 6 hours, which was interesting. And then it was the final run down here into the Canaries, and there was various winds. They had headwinds, they had moderate winds, but generally the fleet was pretty well looked after in the weather department. Not much water over the deck. They didn't see much in the way of heavy weather. It was all a good opportunity to settle into the boats. It was definitely a race. There's that lead group, Philippe Peche, Mark Slats and Jean-Luc Van den Heet. They're really out pushing the boundaries of speed. And Philippe Peche arrives first and of course made that navigational error, missed the identity of the lighthouse, kept going, had to sail back 4 hours and you know, lost some time. Then it was Mark Slats. He sneaked in without us even knowing. We didn't get the radio calls for some reason. So by the time we got to him, he was already at the buoy, and we had a good chat and he carried on. Unfortunately, we didn't get audio for those watching live, and we'll try and rectify that because we do have an audio on another camera, and but it will take time for us to sync that, but stand by, it's coming. And then Jean-Luc, I'm speeding through these 3 because they're a group and I want to explain some of the differences. So Jean-Luc arrives, a beautiful day, you know, big breeze, just power reaching along, and everything looked fantastic. So the biggest thing that hit us, and this is Jane and Christophe who are here as well, the 3 of us are out on the boats. The first thing that hits you is how did Philippe Peche look? He looked really happy to be here. He looked totally pissed off that he missed the mark, which is understandable, but he was also, in our opinion, a little bit sort of stressed, you know, and obviously stressed because of the navigational error, but also it seemed obvious to us he'd been doing a lot of hard work to get here. The boat had sails all over the deck, and so, you know, yeah, he's racing hard. Then you come to Mark Slats. Again, similar feeling. When we turned up, he was a little bit, not aloof, but he was certainly happy to be here, certainly enjoying the experience, but he's very focused. He was focused on, you know, wanting to have this break, but also get going again. Again, you could see he's all about wanting to get out front. He was excited to see that Philippe Peche was only an hour or so up front, and that he'd lost 4 hours, so fantastic, I can, you know, chase him down. So, you know, definitely again another racer. And then along comes Jean-Luc. Now I got to tell you, Jean-Luc was as if he was just his typical happy self, kicking back, having a fantastic time, looking like he was on a summer holiday, and just having a ball. And he looked fit, healthy, typical Jean-Luc. Now, there's probably two reasons for that. One is that he's done it all before. He's got a clear objective of what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. But secondly, I think he is just so at one with his boat, and it's so well set up that he is actually relaxed and he's conserving his energy. And I reckon this comes into the question which we'll follow on a bit later on. Jean-Luc has 2 head sail furling gears on his boat, okay? So he doesn't have to go up forward to change sails and so on. Mark Slatz has got piston hanks. He's got to hank on every sail and raise it and lower it. And the same with Philippe Péchet. So we'll come back to that anyway, but it was a remarkable contrast between the 3 of those guys. After that, you had R.A. Vig. Now, R.A. is surprising everyone. He's coming in on 4th. He's got one of the smallest boats in the fleet. But again, you have this incredible sense, besides the fact he was having fun, he is totally at one with his boat. His boat is really well prepared, all furling gears up the front and all controls back in the cockpit. He was surprised and happy to be in the position that he was in, and he's working hard, but again, there's something telling me that these furling systems are a big advantage, because he was really enjoying it. You know, Jane couldn't get over it, you know, the difference between those with furling gears and those without, the way they were relaxed in their boats versus the like this. So anyway, so Ari's doing well, and then along comes Susie, and I've got to say the same again. Susie was at night time, she was still, or early hours of the morning in the dark. Boat looked good, she was settled. She's not too stressed out. She's just typical happy Susie, looking healthy, looking fit, looking keen to get going. She's a performance sailor. She wants to do really well, but again, she's taking it in a stride. You know, it was really quite happy, talking, all that sort of stuff. So Susie was doing well. Along comes Uku. Uku, I'm okay. You know, that's sort of what he does. Again, he was craving the company. There's no question about that. When he left, you could just see he didn't want to go. You know, as in, he was still doing the GGR and all that sort of stuff, but he just loved the company, and it was kind of sad. That was a real emotional sort of, what would you say? You could just see he's missing people, and obviously missing his wife and the kids and things like that. So, but again, comfortable in his boat. Tapio rocks up, sailing submarine, blasting around the corner. We caught him just as he was heading around the light, and very low freeboard. There's no question, no matter what everyone's going to tell you, it's a wet boat, and he's going to get wet, but it's a good boat, it's fast, and he's found his stride now. You know, he was a mad rush at the end, you know, in the race village to get to the line. And then the first few days were very frustrating. He couldn't get his wind vane working properly, and he was very stressed. But by the time he got here, he'd settled down, he seemed happy, he'd sorted out the wind vane, he was finally sorted out down below. He was feeling confident and very happy to have this little film drop. It was like a psychological stop and a gate to now, let's get into the real part now and head on. So he's pretty cool with that. After Tapio was Igor. Now Igor was just crazy. I mean, he's a happy guy. He's a Russian. He's a big fella. He really knows how to sail, and he's got one of the biggest boats in the fleet. It's an Endurance 35, which is physically a big boat, and that pointed out something really surprising to all of us. When the boat's coming around the corner and we see it sailing, it's floating high. You know, it's really on its lines, and it's fast. We were looking at it in the breeze that he had. Igor's good on sail shape, but the boat's slipping through the water with very little hull wave, all that sort of stuff, and it showed us that because it's such a big boat, the year's worth of food and equipment that Igor's got on board for one person, it's not affecting the boat at all. It's basically floating on its marks, and that may be one of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is that he's doing so well with this boat. It's actually on its design waterline, and he really knows how to sail. Every time we've seen him, his sail shape is perfect. When he took off from the start, he surprised people then, and I was looking, every sail was sheeted perfectly, the trim was right, whereas some of the others, mentioning no names, they were a bit hardened up, maybe watching the spectator fleet and caught up in the moment, but Igor was straight into it. So he's been doing extremely well, you know, a lot better than what everyone would have thought as well. So big happy smiles, you know, the typical Russian, and he's having fun. He's got furling gears all the way through. Then it was Gregor coming through in the Biscay 36, And again, very happy. He was off to what I'd call not a fast start. I think he was settling into the boat, but he certainly found his legs now. You know, in the last 5 days or so since he came through here, he's been rocketing. And I think it is also, that's part of, you know, that whole first leg to here was a chance for them to settle down and just psych up, and they may have been a bit unsure of themselves or not wanting to do the wrong thing and whatever. But once they've left here, they said, well, that's it. They've taken a deep breath and say, next stop Hobart, which is through the Southern Ocean, and so now they're just performing differently. And Gregor took the inside route, and he's right up there, and he's still looking good because we'll talk about weather in a minute. But if he goes where he's going, he could be in the lead group very quickly. He's doing quite well. Abalash, well, Abalash is Abalash. You know, that's Tommy and his beautiful Suhaili replica. That's another boat that's surprising quite a few. It's surprising me as well. Slips through the water really well. Great directional stability. He's sailing it well. He just loves it. He is the peak guy in the fleet, I reckon, that doesn't care about anything else. He wouldn't care whether he had to make phone calls or, you know, once a week or send text messages. He just loves it out there. He just loves the whole thing, and it shows because he is doing well. He made a little blunder when he left here, heading down to the next island, went the wrong way, came back, and he's slowly recovering. So and he's got furling gears. Mark Sinclair. Oh no, then it was Loic. And Loic is, I mean, it's a little Nicholson 32 Mark 10, one of the budget entries in the race, no sponsors, has never worried about polishing the hull ever since he bought the boat because it's a tool, and very unassuming guy. What I would say is he arrived in the night, we had the lights on him and things like that. Happy to be here, keen to get going, really wanted to get into it. He was looking a bit tired though. And maybe that's because he's trying to drive hard. He is relaxing, as you may or may not know. He tried to do a solo circumnavigation previously and he lost his boat. When he did his solo qualifying miles, he came down this part of the world and had a few big issues, you know, got a life raft washed over the side, some big weather. And this was a psychological turning point because he'd now got this far and he was about to go further south than he'd ever been before. And that was big for him. He was looking forward to that. But, you know, he was looking a bit tired, but fit and healthy and raring to go. Then along comes Captain Coconut, and that guy's just nuts. He's likely to be doing this forever. He could be a classic Motesia by the time he's got around the first loop. He says, bugger that, I'm loving this, I'll keep going. You can't stop him talking, you can't stop him smiling, you can't stop him having fun. His boat is a classic. He could be a secret winner, you know, if all the guys in the front start falling apart. He just reminds me of the way Robert Knox Johnson would have been in the very beginning, you know, in 1968, because he's got a reasonably fast boat and it's really well prepared. He's an ex-naval commander, you know, surveyor, so navigation to him is second nature, and he's just beaming with energy and enthusiasm and just loving it. So, and he's not busting his butt. He's going to finish, and he's going to finish in the best possible time he can, but he's being a real seaman, a real sailor, and not going to extremes. So then along comes Nabil. Now this has been an eye-opener because for us on the race management side, Nabil had challenges getting into the race. There's no doubt about that, push for time, but he got there, he got started, and we're all a bit, what's going to happen? And anyway, he got through and he was looking really good when he was here. Everything was working well. Again, I've got to say the weather up until this point, you know, the time they got to this gate was pretty ordinary. Not a lot of water on deck, not a lot of stress of weather. It was more a stress of getting settled into the boat, navigating. But Nabil was looking relaxed, it's all fine. And of course he had his disasters further down the track. So within a day or two of leaving here, his wind vane self-steering gear broke. There's some critical welds on there that just snapped, and it meant that it was irreparable. So it wasn't a case of working or not working. It had been working fine, but now it's like broken, and that's a big problem. And at the time that happened, of course, he was running in heavy northerly winds, tailwinds, and so to get out of that, he wanted to come back here, but that's impossible because that would have been straight into the breeze. So he went across the breeze over to Tenerife, and he had a horrible night. He had one night that was a bit of a nightmare, hand steering, 30, 35 plus knots of breeze, probably 3 to 4 metre seas breaking on the boat, and then he got seasick and everything just turned to mud, you know, and understandably he got completely depressed and really thought, what am I doing here? Reflected on the whole thing and basically threw in the towel and said, no, this is not working. By the time he got back to Tenerife and got another wind vane in and all that sort of stuff, the dream would have been gone. So at this stage we haven't spoken to Nabil since he arrived there. I would expect to chat with him soon, and I wouldn't be surprised. Well, who knows what he'll do, but you know, maybe he'll line up in 22. I'm not sure, but that was a sudden turnaround, and it just shows once again, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the critical nature of the wind vanes, and I'll talk about some of the reasons why some of them might not be working and why some are. Then finally, after Nabil, it was Istvan. And Istvan came through a little bit disappointed to be at the tail end of the fleet, more or less. He's a great sailor. He sailed solo around the world in a 34-footer back in 1990, using a wind vane, using a sextant, and had no real problems. Plenty of challenges and plenty of adventure, but he did it. Now he's just spent 2 years rebuilding a beautiful Tradewind 35. He's got everything perfect, and he made an interesting decision to go with a wind vane that he knew nothing about. It was offered, so he took it, and now he's really regretting that because for whatever reason he hasn't been able to get it work effectively. And yesterday he decided to head into Cape Verde Islands. He's headed there, and he will remove that wind vane completely. His shore crew are going to send in a new unit, a different brand, and he'll put that on and hopefully carry on. But that will mean that he's gone into the Chichester Class. For those that don't know about that, you have the GGR, non-stop solo around the world. Any entrant who makes one stop has to, it's like Chichester, right? Chichester went around the world solo and stopped in Sydney. But they still have to abide by all the other rules. So Istvan will go in, he will get support, get the work done, get out again. He still has to do the rest of the circumnavigation with a sextant. He still is isolated with communication, and he won't be in the running for any of the rankings within the GGR, but he can still carry on with the adventure, and we'll still keep him as part of the event with all the social media and so on. So it's shattering for him because he's a tough guy, he's a tough sailor, and he tried really hard. He came through here, he said he'd been hand steering for the better part of a week. He left here and he was still hand steering, and he said a classic line which sort of surprised us all a bit. He basically said, if it wasn't for sponsors, I'd chuck it in. You know, this is a classic line from Crowhurst, and it was a bit of an eye-opener. Anyway, he did carry on and just conceded it's impossible. So he's lost a small part of his dream, but the adventure's still there, and we're hoping that he can get in and get sorted very quickly and head on out. Then the next one was Antoine. Now, when Antoine came around the corner here by the lighthouse, his sails were already packed up. He was motoring and he was heading to the marina. And we had various reports of why he might have been coming in. He had some issues with his wind vane and a few other little things. Lost a wine corkscrew, you know, to get the bits out. So we're all very interested to see what the main reason was. And this is where this race gets really interesting. As you know, well, I should say this adventure gets really interesting. As you know, we lost Attrition very early on. Now, Attrition is a great sailor, a really nice guy, true gentleman, a very well prepared Rustler 36. He's done all his qualifying stuff. He's been out solo before, all that stuff. And yet he starts the race, and literally days later, within like 4 days, Attrition says, I can't cope with this. I'm missing the family and I'm out of here. Now, that surprised a lot of people. The comments on social media were like, what, didn't he do it before? You know, hasn't he done the miles? All those sorts of things. That's not the point. What happens here is when you're doing all your qualifiers and you're getting ready to do this race, you actually, it's still a game. The race hasn't started. This is all pre-start of the race. And then you come in and you go Falmouth to Les Sabres, you have the race village, you have the build-up, it's all fantastic. Tremendous emotion at the start. And then you get on your boat and it's like, bang, there's nothing. You're not allowed to talk to your family, you've only got an HF radio, and the reality hits home. So it's not as if they weren't used to it before, it's just the reality of 8 or 9 months now with no family, no contact, no nothing, on a little boat by yourself. That's what makes it different. It gets different when you start. So so that was fine, and it was really good that Entrant actually made that decision. And it's very bold of him to make that decision, because you can imagine the effort that he's gone through. So it wasn't easy. He's not just changed his mind, it's just like the reality of it all is just sort of sunk in. So anyway, so back to Antoine. Antoine is now coming in, and we're not actually sure why. So the first thing that happens is we get him on the marina, and I said to him, well, you need any spare parts for the wind vane that's not working? And he said, oh no, I've got them all on board. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And he showed me what's wrong with the wind vane, and he said, oh, bolts fell out. There was one on the flip-flop vane, there's a pivot point, and there's one bolt at each end. So literally on start day, one of the bolts, he heard it fall off and just kerplop. So he lost the bolt. And then some days later, he lost the other one. But the surprising part was that he had the parts on board, so he could fix it. And then it was any other issues on the boat, and then it was, no, not really, just needed to come in and regroup and, just go over a few things and so on. So in the beginning, we were a bit sort of, wow, this is interesting. But over the period of time that he was here, it all started to make sense. What happened was, in Antoine's case, there's a few things about the way the boat is, the way he prepared the boat, and the decisions that he made, that he's now possibly questioning, okay? So, and I'll get into that in a minute when we talk about some other issues, but he literally came in to regroup. He was confused about the boat. There's no question that he knew what the challenge is, but he just needed to make some more decisions, and that's the only reason he came in. We fixed it. He put 2 bolts in the wind vane, and that sort of fixed, but then we found some other problems as well with the wind vane, which I'll talk about on a separate subject. But it was an interesting stopover for Antoine. He was very honest with himself. He was honest with us. He just had to regroup. So that was that story. Kevin, another one. This is a classic. Kevin's a tough guy. Kevin is a mountain climber. He's ex-military, not ordinary military, sort of tough guy military. And this was a huge adventure for him. He's a good sailor, not a strong sailor. He can go anywhere he likes. He prepared the boat very well. He had people helping him and so on. Had all furling gears, the whole bit. But at the end of the day, this was another case of when he's out there, he's just not enjoying it. I think the navigation was a challenge. I think that was shaping up to be challenging. He felt uncomfortable on the boat. There was, the whole big picture was just getting a little bit too much. And when that starts to happen, you start to look for reasons why you might not want to continue. And then he got worried about the mast, and then he got worried about the wind vane, because he heard other people getting worried about their wind vanes maybe. And in the end, he just lost it. He lost the spark. And that happens as soon as you can. Most of these sailors have got the spark really quickly and said, I've got to do the Golden Globe race. And then when they're there, it's like, it doesn't take much. That's the nature of what this race is. The challenge is huge. In perspective, you look at this first little 2-week bit and say, that's a fraction of where I've got to go. Can I do this? You question what you're doing. So it's, he's done all his qualifiers, he's done all his preparations and so on. And he's slept down below and all those sort of things before. But now he's serious, it's real. Once you leave here, everything changes dramatically, and basically Kevin changed his mind. He decided it's not for me. I'd rather be in the mountains doing those sorts of things. So he's literally stepped off the boat. He's asked me to sell the boat for him, which I will do, and he's going to do other things. So he's quite settled, no regrets, quite happy. He gave it a go. He found out it's not for him, and this is the nature of the attrition that will take place between here and Cape Town. It's not over yet. We'll see things evolve, and from an event perspective, it's kind of it's a good thing, because it means those that are going to finally get into the Southern Ocean are going to be the ones that can cope with it, because it gets very serious down there. And if you're getting onto windy TY, remember that word, windy TY, you can Google it, that gives you all the weather. If you look at the weather in the Southern Ocean now, it's really horrific. And these guys and girls are going to be down there in a month or so, 6 weeks or 7 weeks or so, and they're going to experience some very interesting things. So it's been kind of interesting. We're now down to 12 entrants in the GGR. Antoine had just took off yesterday afternoon, so he's Chichester Class. We've got Istvan, who is still in the GGR entry, but once he gets into port and takes the other wind vane, then he'll be Chichester as well. So we'll have 12 GGR entries and 2 Chichester entries. So if you're watching before I get into the thing about wind vanes and furling gears, if you are watching the weather overlay on the tracker, you'll see it's just starting to evolve now. Moving, as they all move south, they're going to start coming to the doldrums, and anything can happen there. It's going to be fascinating to watch. So if you haven't got onto that routine of follow the tracker and then click on the windsock to get the weather overlay, and remember there's a sliding scale there so that you can start looking at the weather as you slide that scale along into the days ahead, and you'll see what's going on. Tommy's out on a blinder at the moment out to the west, and I know his wife's questioning that, so why is he going out there? Why isn't he? I got no idea either, but he's doing the right thing for the weather because he's going to stay in a wind pattern that's going to push him further south really fast. The leaders, as in Jean-Luc and Philippe Péchet and Mark Slats, they're on the edge. Now they're sort of starting to run out of wind. There's a big trough there, so it's really interesting to watch. So get into that. Now finally, this issue about wind vanes and furling gears. First of all, I'll just quickly go over wind vanes. You might have seen the live that I did on how a wind vane works. The reality is that most of the proprietary brand names work, you know. I'm confident to say that every hydrovane that's ever been left the factory works. And it's a very simple system because it bolts on the back of your boat and there's nothing to do. You just got to turn it on virtually and it'll steer your boat if you've got a bit of common sense. And that's the case with the whole GTR fleet. You know, Kevin thought he had problems with his hydrovane. I had a look at it as soon as it got here. It's perfect. It's just how you sail the boat. So that's the hydrovane thing out of the way. At the moment, there's a few different brands on other boats. There's Aries. Aries are doing really well. They have done forever, and they're a servo pendulum system, very strong, very heavy, pretty reliable, and you know, I've got not much more to say about that. There's a couple of monitor wind vanes which are a stainless steel copy of the Aries. The principles are really good and they seem to be performing well at the same time. They're maybe a little bit more vulnerable to physical damage, and if you get a rope cooked up the wrong way or get a drogue or something there, you could bend your mounts and so on. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but there's nothing wrong with monitor. Here's an interesting one. Philippe Péchet is a weight freak. He's trying to keep his boat as light as he possibly can, for good reason. The lighter your boat, the faster it is. And to do that as well, he's chosen a French manufacturer of wind vane, which is called a Beaufort wind vane. It's a servo pendulum system, a very nice wind vane, very high performance, you know, it'll tweak along in light weather, good for running spinnakers. But I've got to concede it's quite light, and that's another reason he's gone for it. When I say light, it's just not heavy. And so that saves weight on the back of the boat. But that's exactly the same vane that Nabil had, right? And Nabil did nothing to break his vane. It's just the world's broke. Now, I don't know whether Philippe's got a super version of that. I don't think he has. I think it's exactly the same as Nabil's. The mounts are different. He's got a stronger mount because it's got to go outside an outboard rudder. Nabil's went straight onto a transom. That's beside the point. The mount won't break, but will Philippe Péchet's wind vane break the same as Nabil's did? And remembering that Nabil's went after 2 weeks and the first bit of heavy weather running in 35 knots. Philippe Péchet's got about 3.5 to maybe 4 months, or say 3.5 months, heavy running in the Southern Ocean. If I was him, I'd be starting to think, uh-oh. So I really hope it doesn't break, because I want to see this race between Jean-Luc and Philippe and Mark and see how it plays out. So that's the Beaufort. The other one is the Wind Pilot. It's a really nice system. It's a servo pendulum system. And it's the one thing I found, and I just had some experience with, and I've never sailed under a Wind Pilot, but I've looked at them closely now with all these issues that are coming up, because it's a few of the Wind Pilots that are having problems. Now I've got to say, the Wind Pilots work, right? There's a lot of them sailing around the world. Some people find them working easier than others, but there's a lot of little adjustments on a Wind Pilot, and you need to adjust the system to get it right for your boat. And when Antoine said he was having problems, I said, okay, so we got on the boat while it was here, and I found a couple of really big issues that Antoine had absolutely no idea about. The first one is that it's an issue that you can't change. Most boats have either got a tiller and you connect the steering lines to the tiller. It's very simple. If you haven't got a tiller, you've got a wheel. And most yachts have got a big wheel, okay? You've seen them on the back of a yacht. And turning lock to lock on that wheel is usually about 1.5 to 1.25 turns. In other words, you go around the wheel sort of 1.5 times, and the rudder has gone 35 degrees that way, or 33 degrees that way, and 33 degrees that way. Now on the Biscay 36, it's a little tight cockpit at the back, so he's got a little wheel, a little tiny one, okay? And to move that rudder from one side to the other, you've actually got to turn it around 2.5 times, okay? Now if you saw my explanation about how a servo pendulum system works, it's basically pulling ropes. You've got one rope pulls in and the other one lets out. And on a tiller, they just go straight onto the tiller, one rope's pulling that way, If you've got a wheel, you've got to put a wheel drum on the wheel, and the wheel drum's about that round, okay? And all of the Wind Pilot wheel drums are the same diameter, right? So you put that on Antoine's little wheel, right? And when the servo pendulum system's working, going from side to side, it's pulling the rope in and out. Antoine's wheel was only moving 90 degrees either side of vertical. In other words, if I was steering with his wheel straight, like that, you'd only go like 90 degrees that way or 90 degrees that way. It's just not enough steering input. Because if you were hand steering, going down a wave or something, you might want to do one full turn and one full turn the other way. Now that's not, I'm not saying it's not a fault of the Wind Pilot, this issue. That's a factor of the boat that Antoine maybe should have realised before, because when you're steering just a little bit like that, you can't even steer a car like that. So the other issue, and an interesting point on the Wind Pilot, is that it has where the ropes connect. It's on the top of a tiller arm like this, and you can connect that rope at the very top, or you can slide it down halfway or down to the bottom. And so Antoine had it set halfway down. And that means that when this arm is moving from side to side with the servo rudder, it's only pulling in a little bit of rope. So if you slide it up to the top, you're getting a lot more rope getting pulled in and let out every time. So there was another point too on Antoine's steering lines where they come into the rope drum on the wheel. His lines were a little bit loose. So the first thing that happened when I got on board, I started moving his wheel, and it was just taking up slack. It wasn't even moving reverse energy, moving the pendulum rudder in the marina. So by the time we did just those two simple things, first of all, slide the adjustment up to the top of the tiller arm on the pendulum, and adjust his steering line so they're tight, we got an extra 25 degrees, nearly 30 degrees. So instead of the wheel going off to 90 degrees only, it went off to there plus another 30 degrees. So it made the wind vane a lot more efficient. So, and then, obviously just replace the bolts, the rest of it was fine, and now he reports now it's working. So you can see, I'm not saying one way or the other whether a Wind Pilot is good, bad or indifferent. I'm just saying there's a lot of adjustment points on some vanes, and the skipper needs to be up with all that and sort of tune the boat. I've got no idea what's happening with Istvan's boat, because he knows what's going on, and it's just something's happening. I don't want to go there. I haven't seen it. I don't know what's going on, but he's certainly going to replace it. So wind vanes are important issues. Those that have got it wrong, they're out of the game, And I must admit, this is my personal opinions. I sold Aries for many, many years. I've been dealing with wind vanes for 35, 40 years or something. For around the world, I would only ever go with a Hydra vane or an Aries, purely because they're built big, strong, bulletproof. And for these types of boats, I personally believe that the auxiliary rudder system is best, and the simple reason for that is that the servo pendulum system is really good. It's fast, it's powerful, it'll steer the boat really straight, and that's really relevant when you've got a boat that has a fin keel and a rudder right at the back, because they turn really fast, right? They manoeuvre really good in the marina or anywhere. When you've got a boat like our boats with a long full keel and a rudder right at the back, they're a dog of a thing to move in the marina because they just don't turn in a hurry. They're directionally stable. So maybe you don't need that big powerful servo pendulum. Nothing wrong with them, that system, it's good. But the beauty of having an auxiliary rudder system at the back of the boat is you've got a free rudder right at the back, and you don't have to use the ship's rudder, and you can use it for a trim tab, but we've gone through that. Enough on wind vanes. Final one. This is the really big one. This is what's going to play out now right through to the end of the race. Some of the entrants have got furling gears, all furling gears. It's to roll the head sails up. Some of them don't have any furling gears. Now, it's not the performance that's, and it's done to save weight aloft, and it's done to give you sail shape. The reality is you will very rarely, if ever, sailing solo around the world, have to go hard to windward, where you need to have perfect sail shape. You sail the weather patterns, so you just get sail up and get going and keep it looking good. If you can roll it in and out with a line from the cockpit, you can do that every time there's a wind shift or a wind up and down or anything like that. You don't have to go up there. If you have to go up and change a sail, you've got to get a new sail out of the boat, drag it all the way forward on the foredeck, hank it on and hoist it up. That's not to mention first you've got to get the old one down, unhank it, bag it, get it down below. All the time you're doing that, you're dragging on your knees, you're exposed up on the bow of the boat, the boat crashing around, you're keeping yourself open for injury, for energy consumption. It's just higher risk. You have to gear up in wet weather gear, all those sorts of things. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and just watch this space. Let's hope it all works out well, but I'll give you a quote from Antoine, and just reflect on this and then we'll finish up. Antoine said to us, "It's horrible on the foredeck, it's dangerous, it's hard work. He doesn't like it up there." And Antoine's got no furling gear on the outer. He has to change every sail. When Philippe Péchet came in, he had sails all over the boat, right? Because he's dropping sails, right? He's not putting them down below. You can't do that in the Southern Ocean. In the Southern Ocean, you leave a sail on deck, it's gone. So his game plan is very, very well thought out. He wants maximum speed now to get a break on Jean-Luc, to get it through the Atlantic, and then he'll hang on for the ride through the Southern Ocean and try and get a break again coming back home. But what's the reality? Where's Jean-Luc? Jean-Luc's right beside him, right? So Philippe Péchet and Mark Slats, they've got a lot of energy to use, but let's just say I don't think Jean-Luc is using up anywhere near as much energy. So watch this space, hell of a race, and we'll look forward to some normal updates. This has probably been a bit too big, so we won't do any questions, but thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy the fun.